Alicia headed down the long drive from Peter's massive house and voice dialed Tim using the Bluetooth. Call Tim. The phone went through its process, then confirmed it was dialing Tim. Calling Tim, mobile. Then the phone started to ring. Tim answered. I was wondering if you were going to call today. Well, I would have called you earlier as I was on the way to Peter's, but I thought it would be a bit early for you. I wanted to thank you for last night. I really enjoyed it. Bo is awesome. This made Tim's day. He is great. I have known Bo for a long time. I'm really pleased you enjoyed his music. Are you going to do anything this afternoon? Alicia looked at her watch. It was only 1:30 p.m. I was thinking of going for a walk with my mother around the Bastrop State Park. I could do with the exercise. You are more than welcome to join us. Tim was glad that she had asked him and confirmed that he would join her. That would be great. I have been lying around the house and could do with the exercise myself. What time? Let me get home and change, let's say 3 o'clock at my place. That will work. Then, clearly wanting to drag the conversation out, he asked, Well, how did the interview with Peter go? Alicia said, It is really deep and absolutely enthralling. I could listen to him all day. But he is not in the best of health, so he can only do so much before he feels tired and needs to rest. His story is awesome. I will go over it with you on the walk if you want. Sure, responded Tim. I will let you go and get ready myself. See you at your place. Tim arrived at Alicia's house on time, but before he could get out of his car, Alicia and her mother, Brenda, appeared and headed towards the car. He quickly started to sling stuff around to make room for them in a vain attempt to make the car look respectable. Notepads, laptop, and other tidbits were quickly placed on the driver's side back seat. They climbed in, Alicia moving to the back seat and her mother riding shotgun. Alicia started to give Tim directions when he informed her he had been there before. He then asked, How often do you walk the park, Brenda? He was curious as she still looked good for her guesstimated age of 45. Brenda ran the park 3 times a week to keep in shape, but replied with a simple, a couple of times a week, and left it at that. Alicia, what about you? Tim asked as he physically maneuvered the mirror and his head so he was looking directly at Alicia in the back seat. She picked up on his grin that accompanied the question. Don't you worry about me, Timo. You won't have to hang around for me. They arrived at the park gate. Brenda showed her pass to the state-employed gatekeeper, who recognized her although she was not in her car and waved the vehicle through, not checking her pass for the expiration date. Tim parked the car and they all piled out. Tim asked, Well, what way do you want to go? Alicia responded, It doesn't really matter to me. Tim responded, According to nature, it does. Really? Said Brenda. Tim answered by quoting almost verbatim some trivia he had researched in the past. We run counterclockwise because everything in nature tends toward a counterclockwise motion. The list of natural phenomena that runs counterclockwise is amazing. For example, the molecule structure of amino acids, the shape of seashells, the rotational direction of all the planets except Venus, and the orbital direction of the Earth around the Sun. As for man-made events, you have carousels, windmills except in Ireland, revolving doors, cable-operated airplanes, the usual direction in which people spin hula hoops, baseball runners, and Elvis's hips all move counterclockwise. So one could assume, Alicia, it is important. He finished grinning from ear to ear. Brenda again chimed in, joining in the humor. Well, in that case, we had better go this way. They started on the 3-mile walk around the state park in a counterclockwise direction. By coincidence, I do tend to feel more comfortable going around the park this way. Strange. Alicia joined arms with her mother, and Tim, not wanting to be left out, linked arms with Alicia and made sure he was in step, skipping to adjust his stride to comply. After making sure he was in step, he said, Unicity. Alicia gave his arm a comforting squeeze and at the same time said, Tim, you are such a nerd. Tim answered, Nerds are cool. After a few moments, he asked, What did Sir Peter Shaw have to say today? Brenda also confirmed her interest. Yes, how did it go today, Alicia? Alicia remained quiet for a moment, thinking deeply about whether she should let Tim in on what was happening. It was then she felt the presence of Peter. It's okay. It's okay. She could feel him telling her that it was okay to share the story. She mumbled, "Wow," under her breath, marveling at Peter's ability before she began to share his story. They walked arm in arm counterclockwise around the meandering path through the stoic pines going over the story. Brenda and Tim were quiet and focused, both realizing the importance of the story to Alicia. 2 miles quickly passed, as did the story. Tim had some questions about the inbreeding, and he wanted more details about the Neanderthal tribes. Alicia was able to explain better than she had realized, telling of how they lived. Imagine a small village with a few people. They have weapons that they use to hunt with, not using them for war. They enjoy the labor of their hands. They do not waste time inventing labor-saving machines. And they have reached a very practical knowledge level which they share via thought and dream. They do not travel far since they dearly love their homes. Although they have boats, they are not used for travel. They are used for fishing and gathering food. They are content with healthy food gathered locally. Their clothing is practical and useful. They really are satisfied and content. It is an egoless society, each individual being content to be part of the tribe, sharing in the joys and losses of the individuals within the unit. This contentment was ultimately to become their downfall. The bloodline lacked variety, and mutations started to appear. "It's almost like the Bible," said Tim. Brenda wanted clarity. "What do you mean, Tim, like the Bible?" Tim answered, "It sounds like the Garden of Eden." Brenda added, "As in the book of Genesis?" Tim then asked, "Have you studied the Bible, Brenda?" Brenda replied, "Oh yes, I was brought up in rural South Texas by loving, God-fearing, and strict Southern Baptist parents. Attending Sunday school and Bible study on a regular basis when I was young was not an option, and when I was young I enjoyed it. In my late teens, I started to question some of what I was hearing. In my early 20s, I rejected the church and its teachings, mainly because of the long-standing prejudices held in the South. In the 80s and 90s, the N-word was common, conflicting with what I would hear as the words of Christ on Sunday. It seemed as if the congregation had missed the point. Then I had a young preacher try to convince me that whites and blacks were different. Not just in color, but at every level different. He literally did not see them as human. It was the final straw, and not the message I was getting in church. I did not like it and refused to attend the church again. My parents were devastated, especially when I married a non-practicing Catholic, Alicia's father, but eventually they accepted it." She paused a moment, then added, "It does seem similar to the story in Genesis." As they walked enjoying the waning afternoon, the pines were starting to come alive with the flocks of marauding starlings filling the air with movement and noise. They returned to the car, piling in with an agreed destination and purpose. They were all going to enjoy some of Brenda's spaghetti, one of Alicia's favorites. The piping hot spaghetti was soon on the table, and, with Tim leading the gathering in a very short prayer of thanks, a common practice in Texas, they began enjoying their dinner. As they filled their plates, the conversation again returned to Peter's story. Tim wanted to dig deeper into the Garden of Eden similarities. Tim was a seasoned reporter and was expert at digging for the story, as were all three gathered around the table. Tim floated a hypothesis. Let's assume for a moment that the people who wrote or told the story of the original sin and the Garden of Eden received it as a dream. For the sake of discussion, and please correct me if I am wrong, Brenda, Eve was from Adam, I think from his rib. This would make them have the identical DNA strand. If we can imagine a shaman or seer dreaming this vision and seeing the DNA, he could interpret it as a snake. The story in Genesis would be a warning against inbreeding. Brenda stood and went to her bedroom to retrieve the family Bible, which was beside her bed. Alicia got up and fired up her iPad. Both returned to the table with the research tools necessary to remove the speculation. Alicia started to type into Google the words serpent and Garden of Eden and then placed her finger over the search button. It quickly downloaded the result. She finished her mouthful of spaghetti, wiping the sauce the uncontrolled trails left on her chin. Okay, in the book of Genesis, the serpent is portrayed as a deceptive creature or trickster who promotes as good what God has forbidden. The serpent appears in the Garden of Eden who tempts Eve to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge and denies that death will be a result. After a short pause, she continued, "Check this out. The Hebrew word Nahash is used to identify the creature that appears in Genesis 3 in the Garden of Eden. God placed Adam in the garden to tend it, but he warned both Adam and Eve not to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge, or you will die. The serpent tells Eve this is untrue, and that if she and the man eat the fruit, they will have knowledge and will not die. So Adam and Eve eat the fruit, but the knowledge they gain is loss of childlike innocence, and they are banished from the garden. According to the rabbinical tradition, the serpent represents sexual desire." Brenda interjected, "The serpent is desire to sin? I have never looked at it like that before. This does tie in nicely with Peter's story." Alicia said, "Yes, it does. I wonder if Peter has looked at the possible correlation between the book of Genesis and his story. The serpent in Genesis represents the DNA strand, and the inbreeding is the original sin. The consequence? Removal from the Garden of Eden, as in the Hebrew version, the loss of childlike innocence." Brenda added, "I'm not sure where I heard it, but I understand that ego starts developing in a child around the age of 3, but it does not mature in a child until they reach puberty. Ego and selfishness seems to be exactly what they meant by the loss of childlike innocence." The conversation at the table was deep. All were interested, and the consequences of Tim's hypothesis were profound. Alicia blurted excitedly, "I can't wait to go over this with Peter tomorrow." Brenda stood up from the table and started to gather the cleaned plates. Tim quickly joined in, taking his plate to the sink, running it under the faucet to pre-clean it for the dishwasher. Alicia joined them by the sink, opening the dishwasher to discover cleaned dishes inside that needed putting away. She removed the silverware and then started placing plates in the cupboards. Tim was waiting patiently with his cleaned plate to place it in the washer. Alicia then asked Tim, "What are you going to do tomorrow when you're asked to find out about the Peter Shaw story?" Tim answered, "I don't think that's going to be a problem. The editor holds a briefing in his office at 8:30 a.m. every Monday to make sure we are all on the same page. That means going over any news that might have accrued over the weekend and also tying up any loose ends. Peter's story has become very much a loose end. None of the local news stations are working on it, as it has gone into hibernation until Peter has to pay the piper for his crimes. Peter's lawyer has put a lid on it. Until it comes to court, everything is speculation. Sir Peter Shaw still has enough clout in this town to make speculation a risky business. I think he will want to drop it until Peter has a court appearance." Brenda turned the conversation back to food. "I have some apple pie and ice cream if anyone is still hungry." Tim blurted out, "Yes, ma'am," and quickly returned to the table. Alicia looked over at her mother, grinned, and returned to the table to take her place next to the expecting Tim. She was starting to like Tim more and more, and he certainly had been able to make himself at home. Brenda heated the apple pie, filling the house with aroma that was obviously having an effect on Tim. Alicia noted he would stop his conversation and keep turning his head to watch the progress of Brenda and the apple pie. Living the life of a bachelor meant that his normal meals were designed around bulk, not flavor, and speed rather than presentation, mainly sandwiches or some fast food. Homemade apple pie was a treat, and the expectation was disturbing. Brenda arrived at the table with 3 plates of apple pie with the vanilla ice cream melting over the top. The conversation was minimal until the pie eating was done. Alicia finally asked a question. Who wrote the book of Genesis? Brenda answered, it was believed that the book of Genesis was written by Moses. Many assume that the book of Genesis was made up of oral traditions, just a bunch of stories passed on from one generation to the next, or that Moses borrowed from the pagans. The views are starting to change. Many people are starting to realize that Moses did not plagiarize these accounts of creation and the flood. Instead, there is evidence that Moses took the earlier documents of Adam, Noah, Abraham, Enoch, Isaac, and Jacob. These are documents that were passed on from one generation to the next, and Moses put them together in one book called the Book of Genesis. Tim complimented Brenda on her answer and said, "You really did attend Bible study. Good for you." "I am absolutely intrigued by the similarities between Peter's story and Genesis," said Alicia. "It will be interesting to see what Peter has to say about it." Tim asked, "Where do you think this is going, Alicia? Do you see it as a book or what?" Alicia answered, "I am doing what my mother told me. I'm going to let the story decide where it is going. Peter has chosen me to help him get what happened to him down on paper. A lot of people would find it hard to believe. I have experienced Peter's abilities. He knows what I am thinking, and if I am upset, he senses it. He can communicate with me. The other thing is that he said he felt I was the one to write it down." Tim said, "He actually said that?" Alicia went over it in more detail. "I wanted to know why he was talking to me. In fact, I told him I was very new to reporting and that you would be better at it than me. He told me he had a very important story to tell, and he felt I was the one to write it down. He said I was the one he needed to tell the story to." Tim answered with a grin, "The chosen one." Alicia responded, grinning as well, "Piss off, Tim." Dinner was finished, and they all left the table, seating themselves in front of the television. Alicia and Tim were on the large leather sofa and Brenda in her recliner. Watching television together, Alicia raised her legs onto the ottoman and rested her head against Tim's arm. Tim, realizing an important step in this relationship had been achieved, and being pleased with the progress, slid his butt forward to a more reclined posture. They all watched TV together until Brenda decided it was time to retire with a good book, leaving Tim and Alicia to enjoy each other's company. Tim left before midnight, kissing Alicia and asking her to call or text him the following day before he loosened his arms. She promised, kissing Tim once more before they separated. She stood by the door until Tim had reached his car. He looked back at Alicia, waving one last good night before the door was closed.